being an investor in real estate is not all it's cracked up to be.
I'm trying to get this rental refinanced. I get a call saying the appraisal failed. I'm like, failed? For what? Structural issues, they say. Right? Now, it's really important that you understand what we're doing here, why we're getting an appraisal. Now, this is how real estate investors basically get infinite money. It's called the BRRRR strategy. You may have heard of it before, and I'm really going to simplify it for you here. But we bought this house for about $120,000, and then we put $40,000 into it. Now, that's the renovation plus your other costs like appraisal fees, closing costs, insurance, utilities, etc., etc. Once again, really simplifying this for you. So we have a total of $160,000 into the deal. Now, we put a renter in it that's paying us rent every month. Now we're going to go to a bank and we're going to say, we would like to get a loan on this property. And they're going to send an appraiser out. We're hoping to get an appraisal of around $200,000. A bank will give you 80%. Some give you a little bit less, but in this case, 80%. 80% of $200,000 is $160,000. So the bank is going to give me a 30-year mortgage of $160,000. That cash is going to come to me, and now I'm going to be able to replenish the $160,000 that I spent on this house initially. That's the game. That's the infinite money game. The problem is the bank won't appraise the property because of the structural issues. No big deal, right? I just got to meet with the structural engineer. He'll tell me what work I need to do for him to write a letter to the appraiser saying this house is structurally sound. But then I get the engineer's email. And basically what this says is that you need to hold the house up as you take the foundation that's there out and build a new foundation underneath the house. Yeah, that's right. That would end up costing more than the house cost me in the first place. So there's gotta be a better way. So I actually send one of my guys underneath the house to get me a full video of the house so we can start making a plan of our own, because this is actually a really common thing. A structural engineer by default is gonna wanna look at the code book and say, this is how you take the house from where it's at right now to the standards in the code book. But you and I can read a code book and ultimately determine how to get the house to the code standards. What you're actually hiring a structural engineer to do is to look at the essence of the code book and look at the principles set out by structural engineering books and education and say, this is a customized plan for you at your given scenario in that given house to help fit your financial situation with this property. Now, that's not always a possibility, but before I accepted this humongous build, I was going to go do some investigation on myself, see if I could come up with a plan that I could present to this structural engineer, and then we could work together, we could collaborate to find a plan that worked for all of us. What I mean by all of us, I mean that he's not going to put his stamp of approval on a plan that doesn't actually make your house structurally sound. So here's what the structural engineer has asked for. Here's the house. I know, it's ugly. And now we have a foundation. And basically what he's wanting me to do is he's wanting me to take, I'd probably have to put a beam underneath here. And then I would have to put jacks on the outside of the house to hold up the house as I completely removed the foundation, and then we would build a new foundation underneath it. That is a very expensive plan. So what I'm proposing instead, now I'm going to go top side here, is we're actually going to leave the foundation in place. Now let's pretend we're looking over the top of this house. These are the floor joists. What we're going to do instead is we're going to build a beam right here inside of the walls of the existing foundation, and another beam right here inside the walls of the foundation. And then we'll actually remove this floor joist and this floor joist, and we'll build floor joists going out this way, right? Because if I just put a beam over here on the side, there'd be nothing for it to attach to. It'd simply be sitting underneath one single floor joist. So by building this ladder from the second floor joist in all the way to the exterior, I gain some strength. All right, now I can build another beam underneath all of this that holds up this whole side of the house over here. All right, we would do the same thing on this side. Now we have basically built a foundation wall inside of the existing foundation walls. So the existing foundation walls are no longer doing any structural work. They're simply keeping the weather out because we're not building a full wall on the inside. Let me show you a side profile of what I'm proposing that we build here. This is just a single beam. So this is the blue beam from before. Obviously, we're going to have it around the whole perimeter of the house. So that will be sitting underneath the floor joist. And then below that, we will have a block wall. And that is going to sit on top of a footing. Now these piers, as you would call them, they have to be at certain distances, which our structural engineer is going to tell us. Now he works out the size of the beams that we need and the distances between the piers and the size of the footings and all of those things. But this plan is much more feasible than lifting up the house as we remove and rebuild a new foundation wall. All right, now here's something I forgot to tell you, that there's actually tenants living here that we don't want to displace, meaning move them out of here. So we can't work from top side, which would be the easy way to do this. We'd be able to cut open the floors and then we'd be able to pour the concrete and build the beams like we need to. No, we actually have to work from the crawl space only, from bottom side. Yeah, good luck.
Now, what I'm hoping for here is that I get into a space where there's a little bit more headroom. Where's the problem? Some wet on my leg. The real question is, how does the front look? But I'm not sure how the hell I'm going to get up there.
This is always where you find out, oh dude, cut the hole in the wrong place. And then we'll pour the forms or put the forms in and such. And then, yeah, and don't worry if we end up cutting out too much. Now that is enough headroom to deal with.
What we'll have to do is we'll have a concrete mixer right on the outside and we will mix the concrete. One guy will mix the concrete and then we'll put it in a 5-gallon bucket with a lid on it and roll it through here because we're gonna have to go all the way to the other side. We've rounded up the troops. We're in there rolling buckets around and then we get hit with our first day of rain and then the next day of rain and the next day of rain. And it turns out that the whole crawl space is completely flooded. There's inches of water in the backyard and in the crawl space. This is extremely important to understand because you are going to face structural issues. And there's actually 3 steps to a structural issue. Number 1 is to stop the bleeding. Number 2 is to do the structural repair. And number 3 is cosmetic. The issue is I didn't actually stop the bleeding. And what I mean by bleeding is generally water intrusion. It could also be like pests or insects like termites or other wood destroying insects. But that's the bleeding. That's what's making the property worse every day. That's what's making the structural problem get worse. So let's talk a little bit about water here. Here's your house. When it rains, water is going to hit the roof. Water is going to hit your yard. Okay, and the last thing you want is for that water to come back into the house. Because when the water starts coming towards the house, ultimately it's going to soften this dirt around your house, around the foundation, and ultimately the foundation and everything inside your crawl space like piers are going to be able to sink into the earth. They're not meant
to be sitting in sopping wet dirt all the time. But houses are built to prevent this. So your first line of defense is your gutter system. Yeah, these gutters are super huge, I know. Rain hits the roof, falls into the gutters. Now the gutters have downspouts, and those downspouts go away from the property. Now water is safely able to get away from your property. Now some houses have negative sloping towards their house. So now you have water that hits the ground and then it comes towards your house. So there's a few different methods on how you might stop the water from hitting the house. Most common one you're going to see is a retaining wall. It is built right here, and maybe inside of that retaining wall is a French drain. So now the water comes, it hits that retaining wall, gets into the French drain, which the French drain, you could see this if it's topside, but you make it go around the outside of the house. Now it safely removes itself from hitting your foundation wall and soaking the ground there. Now let's go topside. This is the house. This is the yard. In this particular situation, we built a gutter system all around the house. Now this yard is actually negative draining towards the house, but it wasn't quite enough to build a retaining wall. So what we did instead was we brought the gutters down to a piping system that went in the backyard and ultimately drained over here. So each one of the gutters went down into this system, kind of like this. There's another gutter up here. It all connected. So all the water goes, this is ugly, I know, but it goes into each one of these pipes and it's ultimately able to get out and away from the property, drains down the street like it's supposed to.
We've stopped the bleeding, water intrusion is done, and now I can start on the actual structural fix. And this is the way that I always do these things. I have my own personal crew go in and dig the footers, the right size and the right depth in the right places, so I can go check the work, make sure it's done right, and then I can go hire a subcontractor in that can do the work for a lot cheaper than my guys would be able to. I get a great price from a subcontractor, and then they send me pictures to get their payment, and that's when I see these.
When they poured the bad footings, they put a single row of blocks on top, and they didn't mortar the blocks, which that's the way it's got to be. You got to build the blocks and you got to mortar them together. You can't just stack the blocks. Plus, I was paying like multiple thousands of dollars for this. And I'm like, dude, if it was just putting blocks on top of each other, I would have had anybody do it. Like, I wanted somebody that could come in there and mortar it. That's why I hired a mason to do this. I don't need a mason to put blocks on top of each other. So obviously that's the reason. And obviously I wanted them in 2 rows, not 1. That's why there's still half the amount of blocks sitting there in the yard, because I got the right amount delivered to the job site. So like, there's not really excuses here. I do understand that, one of my project managers actually talked to him, not me personally. So there might have been some communication error, and I always think about that kind of stuff.
I called the contractor to meet me out at the job site, because this is the most important thing as a project manager, is you want to be able to hold ruthless accountability to your expectations, but you cannot do that unless you have personally set very clear expectations. And I wasn't 100% sure that the expectations were clear because it wasn't me personally handing out those expectations. And when you give expectations, you want to do it in 3 ways. 1 is written. That's going to be a text. 2 is verbal. I'm going to give him a call, or I'm going to physically meet him at the job site to show him the things. And 3, I'm going to do media, which is going to be a video. So I get him out on the job site and I let him know that the footings are going to need to be bigger. I let him know that we're going to need 2 rows of block instead of the 1, and it's going to need mortared in. Then I lay out the exact header sizes and the spacing in between, the connection points, how we're actually going to shim from the top of the pier to the bottom of the beams that he's going to put into place. And here's another pro tip for you. I always have them do phone sales at some place like Home Depot or Lowe's so I can see what they're buying. And actually, when they were buying things, I saw that they were using, for instance, regular nails, which in this circumstance, you would need galvanized nails in most of the locations. I also saw that they were buying beam material, the wood, the 2x6s or 2x8s that they needed, and they were buying non-pressure treated wood. And in this scenario, since we're sitting the wood directly on top of the piers, which is mason, you need pressure treated wood. If it's ever touching masonry like a block, it needs to be pressure treated. So they had actually bought non-pressure treated. So what we did was we used pressure treated wood to shim between the top of the pier and the bottom of the beam. That made that a legal move. But that's a pro tip for you. Make sure you're seeing what materials are going onto the job site. All right, so now I'm sure that I've set clear expectations. I'm sure that he knows exactly what we need. He's got the engineer's letter. He's got my written, verbal, and video of what I want. And then I get the photos of the completed job and the ask for payment.
There's just no way I'm going to be able to pay for this.
The thing is, this is not mortared in, which was something I specifically asked for. So that's going to be a problem. This entryway is also not pressure treated wood. Dang, this is not good. This is like the third time I've had to not pay, and I feel bad, but it ain't done. It's not done, and I gave very specific directions.
Okay, the main things on this one is we need to clean up, need to put a door on the entryway to the crawl space, and we need to put pressure treated wood there, not regular untreated 2x4s. And none of the masonry blocks are mortared in. I just don't understand how that worked. There's also a couple spots where the mortaring they did over the foundation is either bad or non-existent. Now here's the thing, guys. You might be watching this and you might be thinking, gosh, you really need to hire different contractors. And I've hired all kinds of different contractors in my over a decade of doing this, and it's always the same thing. It's just difficult to manage the people that they have going out to these job sites because a lot of times they can't just have one project going on. They have to have multiple projects going on to make ends meet. So the lead person that I'm talking to is trying to manage these other guys to do the work, and communication is just difficult because everybody on a job site doesn't know all the things that we're talking about today, and they're trying to figure it out as they go, and sometimes mistakes are made, and that's why it's so important to become a strong project manager. And it's not that you're beating these guys down and holding back payment, even though those are sometimes things that you have to do, hold back payment until you get the job done like you want it done. But the point that I'm trying to make to you is that even back at the beginning, with the structural engineer, it was important that I stepped in to set the vision that I had for this project, to set the expectations so I could make sure that I got the product that I wanted within the financial guardrails that I had for this project. And no, this contractor is not bad. He's facing some difficulties, and I understand that. In fact, this is one of the best contractors that I work with, and I'll continue to work with him on all the projects that I can get him on. Because unless you're going to do all the work by yourself, which is an option, but if you're not going to do that, if you're really wanting to do more than one project per year, you really need to rely on other people to get jobs done. Therefore, you need to understand how to manage those people. And as you've seen in this video, if you don't understand at least the basics of what is necessary on a real estate investment, you're not going to know how to manage these guys correctly. So I really encourage you guys to get the education that you need so you can be a strong project manager and therefore a strong real estate investor. Luckily, I make videos like this all the time. Hopefully you guys picked up a thing or two, and go watch a couple of my other videos so you can pick up some more.